Hello, hey, hi, how we doing? Morning. Make sure we get everybody in here. Da-da-da. All right, we might have a couple trickling in here, but hello. Happy Wednesday. I sent y'all an email last night about assignment 3 and how I kind of goofed that up. So like I said in that email, what I intended you guys to do for last weekend was to do the discussion post that I put up last week. But I also made assignment 3 available, which was my B. In hindsight, that was a bit of a silly goose move. But as long as you have both of those things done by this weekend, that will count as your assignment. So if you haven't done the discussion post, which is on the discussion board, go do that by Sunday night. And if you haven't done assignment 3, which is available on Blackboard now, has been, and the due date is correct on there now. So it is due Sunday night at midnight. Do both of those things and you will be good to go. Okay. That's the biggest housekeeping thing. We are today going to do a Kahoot to review the back half of chapter 5, and then we're going to start our chapter 6 lecture. So we are going to get into memory. So transitioning away from learning, although we are going to incorporate a lot of what we have learned in learning because they are connected. How we learn and then how we store our memories are very much intertwined, and you can't really do one without the other. So I'm going to give everybody like a minute, maybe more, just make sure we have everybody in here. But I'll go ahead and start sharing the screen. All right. There we go. Like how it says play with up to 10 players. Forget your rules. Can't see the code. Okay, that would be a problem. Wonder why. Okay. All right, I'll go ahead and put the code in the chat also. I don't know why it's not showing up. All right, so hopefully y'all can see the answers when we get started, and if not, I'll just reset my screen share. Hopefully that works. All right, chapter 5, part 2. Kind of a multi-layered question here. Can't see it. Okay. In that case, one person saw it. Stop share. We're gonna try this again. All right, is that better? Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about this one. All right, so in the Bobo doll experiment, we talked about that with our observational learning. So Bobo doll experiment, you got two groups. One group of kids sees an adult playing very nicely with this blow-up doll named Bobo. One group of kids sees an adult playing very aggressively with the Bobo doll. So what happens is the kids mimic the behavior of whichever category of adult they see. So the question there is, what is the adult's behavior? So the adult's behavior is the thing that we're manipulating, right? That's the thing that changes from group to group. So we would call that the independent variable. And then the kid's behavior in response to those adults' behavior would be the dependent variable. All right. We go forward. All right, so extinction is difficult with intermittent reinforcement. What that means is if you are having something being partially reinforced, so like not every time you do it, that is going to engage your brain for longer. Okay, so the way I would explain this is two ways. First of all, when I was first teaching my dog, who's over here, how to sit, gave her a treat every time she sat. Okay, so that's continuous reinforcement. But we don't do that anymore because she knows to do it. And eventually, if you do it enough times, continually, they start to only associate that reward with that behavior. So they're only doing it to get the reward instead of just doing it because you said to do it, which is the eventual goal. That is partially to do with the action of dopamine. So if you are rewarding continuously, you need more dopamine every time to continue to incentivize that behavior. Okay, so that is also how dopamine affects the brain and a lot of like drug behavior. But in this case, we're mostly just talking about less serious stuff. All right, the law of effect, very straightforward. All right, so Thorndike's law of effect says that stimuli followed by a reinforcer tend to be encouraged. So that is basically the entire idea behind positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. But if you respond a certain way to a command or to, like it says here, stimuli, you are going to be more likely to repeat it if you are encouraged or reinforced. All right, well, I'm sure Albert Bandura believes a lot of things, but we mostly just talked about this one. And it's related specifically to his very famous experiment, which we talked about a few minutes ago. Okay, so children learn by imitating others. Um, so positive reinforcement led to the actions continued. That's a good guess. But in this case, the kids didn't need any positive reinforcement to mimic the adult's behavior. They just did it because they saw an authority figure doing it. In this case, we're talking about kids learning and internalizing behaviors based on seeing what other people do, specifically people older than them that they respect. So we call that observational learning. Hey, you're fine. Right, just kind of touched on this a second ago. All right, so with continuous reinforcement, you are, like I said, every time that specific behavior is being exhibited, you are rewarding the subject. So the ratio doesn't change. So it's, if it's a 1-to-1, every single time they do it, you reward them. And then the interval doesn't change. So there's no time difference in between rewarding them for that behavior. It is great when learning a new skill. So like I talked earlier about when I was teaching Mammy to sit, she would get a treat every time she sat because we are introducing that positive association initially. But that can quickly lose its effect. You talk about how that dopamine boost that or oxytocin, a couple of other neurotransmitters involved there, but the boost that they get from getting that reward sort of diminishes as you continue to do it. And so there's the reward is less of an incentive. And every instance of a target behavior reinforced is completely true. That continuous reinforcement, that's exactly what it is. Okay. How do we define observational learning? Learning by observing others. Very good. Exactly what it sounds like. It's what we're talking about with the Bobo doll experiment, seeing what somebody else does and then mimicking it. All right, so it's this guy, but who is this guy? Me? Hey, what? Hey. Come on. Hey. There you go. She gets pretty jealous that I'm talking to other organisms. That is Albert Bandura. Abraham Maslow is a good guess. Maslow is one of the humanists, so he came up with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But no, in this case, we're talking about Albert Bandura, Stanford psychologist, one of the most important psychologists of the last 50 years or so. What is a reinforcer? All right, so it strengthens the desired response. So talk about negative or positive reinforcement. Either one of those scenarios, we're trying to continue whatever behavior is being exhibited. Whereas punishment, I'm trying to decrease that. Don't know if y'all are seeing this right now, but chill. Calm down. True or false? This is true. Okay, so we cannot actually teach a cat to play the piano because of this idea called instinctive drift. Right, so that's not really a part of a cat's like natural life cycle, learning how to play a musical instrument. So at a certain point, they'll go back to like hunting small animals and knocking things off tables and other things that cats do. Speaking of which, I don't know where ours is. All right, what's successive approximation? Right, so we are reinforcing as the desired behavior approaches. Okay, so the example I used here was this little dog that is rolling over. So rolling over has a couple of steps to it. So they sit, they lay down, then they roll over. So it's rare to teach a skill like that has kind of like multiple parts to it and is like relatively complicated on the first try. So you usually have to approximate that behavior successively, as the name would suggest, as you get closer and closer to it. So like teach them to sit, reward that, teach them to lay down, reward that, teach them to roll over finally, and reward that until eventually they can do the more complicated behavior on their own. So as things get more difficult, you continue to reward. Hello. Just, it's a very full couch here. Hi. Hey, buddy. You heard us talking about cats. Yeah, you did. Hey. All right, a fixed ratio schedule is reinforcement based on a certain number of responses. Okay, so there's 4 options here. There's fixed ratio, variable ratio, fixed interval, variable interval. You can tell which one is which. Certain number, that's going to be fixed. Ratio in this case is number of responses, number of trials. Anytime you see something about time, we're talking about fixed interval. Okay. This is absurd, but not uncommon. I don't know. These guys are actually like best friends. So this is normal. Hey, buddy. Everybody gets pets. All right. So the Marauders map is not a great example of this because the Marauders map is a very literal map. A cognitive map is sort of a map that we create of a certain like area or building or whatever in our head. So the question here is, when asked for directions, his job, one says them in detail. So without even like having like consciously thought about this, we create these cognitive maps, these sort of mental pathways in our head to get wherever it is we're going. So like of your school, you have a map in your head of like how to get to your classes and things like that. Hey, Joe. Cat just pooping the dog on the nose. I don't think she liked it very much. So this is true. You can learn how to do something without ever exhibiting it. You might not be able to exhibit it, or you might just store it in your implicit memory, which is something we'll talk about in the next chapter. And we call that latent learning. This idea that you can hold bits of information or even entire behaviors in your head without ever actually doing them. Oh, bye. All right, so I will go ahead and say that this example of negative punishment I have on this graphic is not a good one. We'll talk about why in a second. So negative punishment, you are ending something that's desired. So if you acted out and misbehaved and your parents took away your cell phone for like a week, that would be negative punishment because you're taking away something that somebody wants. In this case, I don't think this is a great example because this appears to be positive punishment. This appears to be this little girl or guy, don't really know, has done something naughty and has been put in the corner. So that seems to be something unpleasant being introduced rather than something good being taken away. Do better, Kahoot. Go away. All right, positive reinforcement, associating an action with a reward. So presumably these guys just won a big football game. People behind them are cheering them. So that kind of interaction would be called positive reinforcement because they are trying to encourage them to keep winning football games. Hey. You're being a little ridiculous. All right, positive punishment, we are adding something unpleasant to decrease a behavior. Okay, so in this case, our little doggo friend here has taken a little wee on the carpet. So he's being positively punished by being scolded. I don't recommend this type of training for dogs, but if we're adding something pleasant after a behavior, that's positive reinforcement. So positive does mean something's being added, but the goal is different. So instead of trying to get a behavior to continue, which would be positive reinforcement, we're trying to get a behavior like tinkling on the carpet to stop. Yeah, does that sound like something you've done before? Maybe? Okay. Yes, I used to do that. Yes. All right, so instinctive drift is a tendency for an organism to revert to instinctive behavior. So no matter how good of a doggo this doggo is, if he or she is out on WALK, not going to say that word out loud for obvious reasons. No matter how good that dog is, if they see a squirrel run across them while they're out on that WALK, they are going to take off after it because that's their instincts. Dogs chase squirrels. And this is also the main reason that we can't teach animals to exhibit certain behaviors. We also can't teach humans to exhibit certain behaviors because our instincts dictate otherwise. All right, a variable ratio schedule. This is one thing that you do need to know the difference between these four things. Reinforcement based on an unpredictable, so we know it's variable based on the unpredictable word there, and the number of responses. So that indicates that it's ratio. So if it was variable interval, that would mean that the time changed in between the trials. And then this is a good example of that because we're talking about slot machines and that reward comes intermittently. Hey, chill. All right, partial reinforcement. We used to have guinea pigs in my house growing up. We do not have one here, obviously, because it would just be constantly getting hunted. Don't want that for the little guys, do we? No, no, we don't. That is true. Okay, so we talked earlier about how if you reward something partially or not, continuously. And it's going to keep your subject more engaged in a longer term. And it's also going to increase the amount of dopamine that does go into your subject's brain, or get released in your subject's brain, I should say, when they do get rewarded, which is what you want. You want that reward to actually feel like a reward. Latent learning is hidden learning that becomes apparent. So we talked about observational learning. We talked about observing behaviors that maybe you never exhibit, but then all of a sudden, hey, I didn't know I knew how to do that, but I did. So that is hidden learning that becomes apparent, which we sometimes learn from our parents or other authority figures in our life. Right. Woohoo. Good job, guys. Nice job, Cassidy. Okay. So our next step is we're going to take a break until about 9:20. And then we are going to come back and start chapter 6. I don't know how deep we're going to get into it, but we're going to do it. So yeah, we'll take a little break here and I will see you guys in about 5 minutes.